On a bustling Saturday evening, Sarah, a young black woman, had just finished her shift and decided to stop by the supermarket for some essentials. The parking lot was crowded with shoppers rushing to complete their weekend errands. After a bit of searching, Sarah finally spotted an open space near the entrance. She maneuvered her car into the spot, aligning it carefully between the lines. Before she could even open her door, a loud screech of tires erupted nearby. An aggressive white SUV veered in, halting just inches from her vehicle. Sarah glanced up to see a middle-aged white man behind the wheel, his face flushed and his eyes burning with anger. He rolled down his window and pointed at her, his voice a sharp blast. "That spot was mine," he yelled, frustration and resentment spilling from his words. Taken aback by his abrupt hostility, Sarah attempted to remain composed. "I'm sorry, but I didn't see anyone waiting," she replied, striving to clarify the misunderstanding. However, her response only fueled his anger. The man exited his car and approached her, blocking her way. His contemptuous gaze bore into her, as if her mere existence was an affront to him. "Don't make excuses," he sneered, his face twisted in disdain. "You people are always like this, pretending not to see anything and doing whatever you want without respect for others." Sarah felt a familiar chill wash over her, recognizing the undertones of racism in his words, something she had faced countless times before. She inhaled deeply, trying to manage her discomfort. "I truly apologize if you were waiting, but I really didn't see anyone here," she said, hoping to soothe his anger. Yet, her calm demeanor had no impact on him. He stood his ground, arms crossed, his eyes mocking her. "Of course she didn't see. You people never pay attention to anyone else, do you?" he spat, his words dripping with prejudice. In that moment, Sarah understood that this confrontation was no longer just about a parking space. He was invading her space, his aggressive stance making her feel cornered, as though she were an intruder in a place where she had every right to be. She could feel his heated breath against her skin, his contempt radiating as he stared her down. Determined to maintain her composure, Sarah thought of the many instances where strangers had made her feel unwelcome in places they deemed their own. She knew that allowing her anger to bubble over would only escalate the situation. "Look, I don't want any trouble. We're just talking about a parking space here," she said, her voice steady despite the turbulence inside her. However, her calmness only intensified his fury, as if each of her composed words stoked the fire within him. He moved closer, eyes full of challenge, his finger jabbing toward her chest in an attempt to intimidate her. "Who do you think you are to talk to me like that?" he shouted, his voice menacing. "I'm sick and tired of your kind's arrogance. You people think you can do whatever you want without caring about anyone else." His words landed like a physical blow, striking at Sarah's self-worth. The disdain he expressed wasn't just directed at her. It extended to her entire community. The phrase, "you people," was laced with racism, leaving her feeling marginalized and disrespected because of her skin color. Sarah longed to escape his presence, but he stood firmly in front of her car door, forcing her to confront him. As onlookers began to notice the confrontation, some gathered to watch, yet none stepped forward to intervene. Feeling the weight of their gazes, Sarah kept her voice composed, despite the chaos stirring within her. "I'm really sorry if you've been waiting, but I didn't see any car here," she reiterated, hoping for a de-escalation. Unfortunately, her words only ignited his rage further. "Of course you didn't see. You people never pay attention to others, do you?" he hissed, his anger boiling over. At that moment, Sarah realized that her explanations were futile. This man wasn't seeking an apology. He was intent on asserting his power and belittling her. Although her heart raced, she resolved to stay calm and maintain the space between them. Just as she prepared to turn away to avoid further conflict, the man struck her across the face with a brutal slap. The sudden impact stunned her, whipping her head to the side and leaving a sharp sting in its wake. She stood frozen for a moment, reeling from the assault, while he stepped back, his expression smug, as if he had just delivered a lesson in justice. Sarah's pride was wounded, and as the pain subsided, it was replaced by a surge of anger. No longer afraid, she instinctively raised her hand and slapped him back, not as hard, but enough to communicate that she would not accept this humiliation quietly. Her reaction was not driven by a desire for revenge, but was a necessary response to the violation of her dignity. The man stared at her in shock, his eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and fury. The crowd, now fully aware of the escalating situation, began to murmur, some pulling out their phones to capture the unfolding drama. He staggered backward, a hand pressed against his cheek where she had struck him. His complexion drained of color, and a furious tone laced his voice. "How dare you hit me? Who do you think you are?" Sarah stood firm, her fists clenched tightly to suppress the storm of emotions raging inside her. The man continued to unleash a torrent of insults, each word dripping with malice. In that moment, she realized it was crucial to leave before the situation escalated further. Yet, she remained shaken by his unjust aggression. His unprovoked attack and racially charged remarks left her feeling more than just a victim of a parking spat. She felt like a target of a deeply ingrained prejudice. Turning away, she tried to escape his hateful gaze, but the sting of humiliation and pain from the slap lingered in her mind. Sarah entered the supermarket, determined to focus on her task of gathering a few essentials. Clutching her shopping basket tightly, she took a deep breath, attempting to shake off the negative feelings that haunted her thoughts. She gathered some vegetables, milk, and bread, but the heavy weight of the earlier confrontation loomed over her. Although she sensed the stares of the shoppers around her, she couldn't discern if they were genuinely observing her or if her mind was playing tricks on her. The echoes of the man's racist comments reverberated in her thoughts, amplifying her feelings of frustration and helplessness. How could someone justify the right to assault and demean another based solely on the color of their skin? After collecting her items, Sarah walked back to her car, her heart feeling leaden yet hopeful that the incident would eventually fade. However, her heart sank as she approached her vehicle, noticing something amiss. Long, deep scratches marred the side of her car, as if someone had deliberately taken a sharp object and dragged it along the shiny surface. Anger and frustration surged within her as she realized the damage was undoubtedly the work of the man from earlier. In a single moment, she felt both helpless and furious, wishing her earlier parking encounter had been just a coincidence. Instead, it had spiraled into assault, insult, and now vandalism. Though her car wasn't particularly expensive, it represented years of hard work, now tainted by the baseless hatred of a stranger. Taking a deep breath, she fought to regain her composure and think rationally. She knew calling the police could complicate matters, but the deep scratches were a clear violation she could not ignore. The damage wasn't merely a physical loss. It symbolized the injustice and discrimination she had just endured. Resolutely, Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed the police, delivering a succinct account of the parking lot incident. Her voice trembled, yet she remained firm as she detailed the unprovoked attack and the damage to her property, indicating that the man was still nearby. After hanging up, she scanned the area, searching for the man. She quickly spotted the white SUV parked close by, the man inside wearing a smug expression that revealed his delight in her distress. While waiting for the police, Sarah stood by her car, striving to remain calm despite the storm of emotions within her. She understood this had escalated beyond a mere disagreement. It was a battle for the respect and fairness she rightfully deserved. Minutes later, the wail of police sirens pierced the air, bringing a sense of relief as two police cars pulled into the parking lot. Their presence provided reassurance that someone was finally there to support her in clarifying this unjust situation. As the officers stepped out, Sarah approached them quickly, recounting her experience. Although her voice still quivered with emotion, she clearly outlined the events from the moment the man aggressively confronted her to the discovery of the scratches on her vehicle. One officer listened intently, taking notes, while the other approached the man to engage him in conversation. Sarah observed closely, caught between hope and anxiety. Although she tried to remain composed, her mind raced with the fear that he might twist the narrative, placing blame on her as he had done before. In situations like these, she knew prejudice often obscured the truth. When the officer reached the man, his demeanor shifted instantly. He raised his voice, claiming he was a victim, insisting that Sarah had attacked him without cause. He attempted to spin the narrative, portraying himself as the one defending against her aggression. His blatant falsehoods filled Sarah with shock and rage, yet she chose to remain silent, allowing the officers to assess the situation. The officer returned to her, asking further questions about the altercation and the slap. Sarah recounted the events carefully, making it clear that she had tried to walk away, but he had persisted. She explained the incident involving his slap and how her response had been a light slap in self-defense. The officer nodded, then examined the scratches on her car, which stood as undeniable evidence of the damage inflicted upon her property. These marks were crucial pieces of evidence that could not be concealed, regardless of how much the man lied. Sarah watched intently as the officers exchanged low murmurs, glancing at the man still lingering near his SUV. Finally, they approached him, and one officer gestured for him to turn around. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Sarah felt a wave of anxiety begin to ebb. The man yelled in protest, hurling venomous insults at Sarah, insisting she would pay for her actions and that she couldn't escape the consequences of her behavior. But the officers ignored him, ushering him into the back seat of the patrol car. Even as the door slammed shut, his hateful glare pierced through the window, igniting a fresh wave of anger and unease within Sarah. As she stood there, a mix of relief and exhaustion washed over her. She understood that this was only the beginning. He would likely continue to twist the narrative during the investigation. But for now, she felt that justice was finally within her grasp. One of the officers approached her, speaking reassuringly. "We have sufficient evidence to proceed with the case. Would you like to file a formal complaint?" Sarah nodded firmly, her resolve unwavering. "Yes, I want to see this through. He can't get away with this." As she watched the police car drive away with the man inside, a sense of relief enveloped her. Yet, a quiet pain lingered in her heart. She knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but this time, she would not back down. After the police car containing the man vanished from sight, Sarah was invited to the police station to provide an official report of the incident. Sitting in a small room, she felt as though an oppressive silence had descended, engulfing her as her once peaceful life had been shaken by the weight of deep-seated prejudices. Sarah had always hoped to steer clear of such confrontations, but as she sat across from the officer, anxiety gnawed at her. This officer had witnessed the final moments of her clash with Mr. Smith in the parking lot. He handed her a sheet of paper and a pen, instructing her to write down a detailed account of the incident. Taking a deep breath, Sarah focused on recalling every single detail, every word and action, particularly the moment Mr. Smith had assaulted and insulted her. She was determined to ensure that nothing was overlooked or twisted. As she wrote, the memories replayed vividly in her mind, each detail serving as a stark reminder of the hostility and injustice she had faced. Every word on that page was a testament to the unfairness she endured. She was acutely aware that the moment he struck her, he would likely try to cast her as the aggressor and himself as the victim. The thought that bias might distort the truth filled her with apprehension, but she was resolved to expose the reality of what had transpired. When Sarah completed her statement, the officer read it over carefully, occasionally looking up to clarify certain points. He wanted to make sure every aspect was clear, knowing that Mr. Smith would likely attempt to manipulate the facts to his advantage. Sarah described the entire sequence of events, from his aggressive approach to her vehicle to the offensive remarks he had made, culminating in the slap and the damage to her car. The officer shifted closer, his expression filled with empathy, acknowledging that this was more than just a disagreement over parking. It was about dignity and the right to be treated fairly, a conflict no one should have to endure. Their discussion was interrupted when another officer entered, his demeanor serious. He informed them that Mr. Smith had outright denied Sarah's account, claiming she had attacked him first. He insisted he had merely acted in self-defense against her supposed rudeness. This blatant fabrication sent a wave of anger and frustration through Sarah. How could he distort the truth so easily? However, she quickly regained her composure, understanding that dealing with such lies was part of the uphill battle she was entering. "No," Sarah replied, her voice calm yet determined. "He was the one who initiated the attack. I only defended myself when he crossed every boundary with both his actions and his words. This isn't merely about a parking spot. It's about how he viewed me as inferior simply because he chose to." The officer nodded, acknowledging her strength. "We've examined the scratches on your car, and based on your account, we have sufficient grounds to proceed with charges for assault and property damage. However, to strengthen our case, we'll need to find any potential witnesses. Do you recall anyone observing the incident?" Sarah paused, visualizing the parking lot's occupants. She remembered a few bystanders who had watched but hadn't intervened. "I'm unsure if anyone recorded it," she admitted softly, "but there could be security cameras that captured it all." The officer agreed and mentioned that they would reach out to the supermarket management to check the security footage, explaining that this might take some time, but could provide crucial evidence to substantiate her claims. His assurance eased some of Sarah's worry, although the threat of Mr. Smith attempting to twist the narrative still loomed over her. But she reminded herself that she couldn't give up. This was her moment to assert herself and reveal the truth. Before leaving the police station, the officer handed her a copy of her statement. He also informed her that she might need to return to provide more information or help identify witnesses if necessary. Stepping outside, Sarah felt the air was more liberating. Yet the trauma and resentment from her recent encounter weighed heavily on her heart. Though the situation wasn't fully resolved, she pledged to see it through to the end. This was about more than just defending herself. It was about reclaiming justice, not just for her but for others who had faced similar injustices. This time, she would not allow prejudice to silence her. She was ready to fight, no matter the challenges ahead. A few days later, Sarah received a call from the police updating her that they had gathered enough evidence to formally arrest Mr. Smith. The pivotal piece of evidence was the security footage from the parking lot, clearly documenting everything from his aggressive approach to her vehicle to the verbal abuse and, most importantly, the slap he had delivered without cause. The video also captured Sarah standing calmly, trying to defuse the situation, which illustrated that her response was merely self-defense. Upon hearing this news, a wave of relief and gratitude washed over Sarah. The truth had been documented, and she no longer had to face the lies alone. Yet, a lingering worry remained. She understood this was merely the beginning, and Mr. Smith would likely attempt to retaliate, once again painting himself as the victim. Nevertheless, she was determined to see this through to the end. The following morning, Sarah was called back to the police station to finalize the legal proceedings. As she entered the reception area, officers had prepared the necessary documents. One officer who had been her primary contact approached her, explaining the next steps. He informed her that Mr. Smith would be in custody that day, facing formal charges for assault and property damage. Not long after, Sarah was invited to a small meeting room to wait. As the minutes ticked by, her emotions swirled between anxiety and determination. She reminded herself of her strength. She had already faced shock and unjust humiliation, and now she was prepared to defend her dignity until the end. A few moments later, Mr. Smith was brought into the room, escorted by officers with his hands cuffed. Seeing him, Sarah noticed that his eyes remained filled with contempt and hostility, despite his vulnerable situation. He looked at her defiantly, his cold glare placing the blame squarely on her. As soon as he laid eyes on her, he erupted into a tirade, shouting insults. "You set me up, you liar," he yelled, his face flushed and his eyes seething. "You'll pay for this. Who do you think you are?" Sarah met his hateful gaze with calmness, choosing not to respond, holding her composure steady as if to convey that he no longer wielded any power over her. His calm demeanor seemed to infuriate Mr. Smith further. He continued to lash out, asserting his victimhood and claiming Sarah had orchestrated the entire incident. However, the officers, well aware of the situation, quickly intervened to quell his harassment. One officer stood by Mr. Smith, instructing him to be quiet and emphasizing that everything had been thoroughly investigated and he would face accountability for his actions. She had long hoped to sidestep the situation, yet as Sarah reminded herself of the righteousness of her actions, a wave of worry washed over her. An officer sat across from her, one who had witnessed a violent altercation in the parking lot. He handed her a sheet of paper and a pen, asking her to detail the entire incident. Sarah took a deep breath, striving to recall every word and action, particularly the moment when Mr. Smith assaulted and verbally attacked her. She wanted her account to be precise, ensuring that nothing was left out that could be manipulated or disregarded. As she wrote, the memories of that fateful day replayed vividly in her mind, each detail serving as a reminder of the injustice and hostility she had faced. Every word she inscribed was a testament to the unfair treatment and hatred she had endured. Sarah understood that from the instant he struck her, Mr. Smith would attempt to paint her as the aggressor, presenting himself as the victim. The thought that prejudice might distort the truth filled her with apprehension, but she was determined to shine a light on reality. Once Sarah finished her statement, the officer reviewed it meticulously, occasionally glancing up for clarification on specific points. He wanted to ensure everything was unambiguous, aware that Mr. Smith would attempt to twist the facts. Sarah recounted the events calmly, detailing his aggressive approach to her vehicle, his derogatory remarks, the slap, and the damage inflicted on her car. After hearing her account, the officer leaned in closer, his expression full of empathy. He recognized that this was not merely a disagreement over parking, but a matter of dignity, a right to fair treatment, and an ordeal that no one should have to endure. As their conversation unfolded, another officer entered with a grave expression, informing them that Mr. Smith had completely denied Sarah's version of events, even asserting that she was the one who had attacked him first. He claimed he had only acted in self-defense against her alleged rudeness, attempting to construct a narrative that contradicted the truth. Anger and frustration surged within Sarah. How could someone fabricate such a falsehood after what he had done? Nevertheless, she quickly regained her composure, understanding that confronting these lies was part of the arduous battle ahead. With a calm yet resolute voice, she declared, "No, he was the one who attacked me first. I only defended myself when he violated every boundary, not just through his actions, but also with his words. This isn't just about a parking spot. It's about the way he perceived me as inferior." The officer nodded, his demeanor serious. "We've examined the scratches on your vehicle, and with what you've told us, we have sufficient grounds to take action against him for assault and property damage. However, to strengthen the evidence, we'll need to ascertain if there were any witnesses nearby. Do you recall anyone witnessing the incident?" Sarah concentrated, visualizing the individuals present in the parking lot. A few people had paused to observe, but no one had intervened. "I'm not sure if anyone recorded it," she admitted softly, "but there might be security cameras in the parking lot. If we can access them, I believe there will be clear evidence." The officer agreed, stating they would reach out to the supermarket management to check the security footage. "This might take some time," he said, "but if evidence exists, it will be invaluable in ensuring the truth is revealed." His certainty offered Sarah a sense of relief, yet a shadow of worry lingered in her heart. She knew that regardless of the evidence, Mr. Smith might still attempt to manipulate the narrative. His blatant lies were proof of that. However, Sarah reminded herself not to lose hope. This was her opportunity to stand up for herself and reveal the truth, and she was prepared to hold her ground. Before leaving the police station, the officer handed Sarah a copy of her statement, explaining that she might need to return to provide further information or identify witnesses if necessary. As she stepped outside, the fresh air felt liberating, as if she had emerged from a storm. She felt a newfound lightness within her, as though she had finally set down a heavy burden. Still, her mind occupied itself with the challenges that lay ahead. Sarah understood this journey was far from over. Legal procedures and confrontations with Mr. Smith awaited her. She was aware that Mr. Smith, with his hostility and arrogance, would not back down easily. He would likely seek legal representation or any means to evade punishment. Yet, Sarah had made a firm decision. She would not allow anyone to intimidate her or silence her. This situation transcended a personal dispute. It was a fight for self-respect and the right to equality and justice. Looking ahead, she acknowledged the hurdles still to come, but her faith in justice and the power of truth fueled her determination as she prepared to confront whatever lay in store. Weeks passed, and Sarah received a notification about Mr. Smith's trial. Her resolve to pursue the case stemmed not just from a desire to protect her dignity, but also from a commitment to ensure that individuals like Mr. Smith understood that prejudice and hatred would not go unpunished. During this time, she frequently met with her attorneys, meticulously preparing her testimony. The video footage of the parking lot incident and the evidence of the damage to her car motivated her, as she recognized these would serve as undeniable proof. Yet anxiety lingered. She questioned whether justice would truly be served. Sarah was aware that racial discrimination cases often face hurdles and that truth did not always prevail. Nonetheless, she remained steadfast in her resolve. On the day of the trial, Sarah entered the courtroom, her tension palpable. The silence was thick with anticipation, every eye fixated on the proceedings. Mr. Smith occupied the opposite side, his face icy and his eyes full of defiance, accompanied by his defense attorney, a middle-aged man exuding calmness and sharpness. Sarah noted the opposing side's thorough preparation, but drew reassurance from her own lawyer's determined gaze. The trial commenced with the prosecution's opening statement. Her attorney, a sharp young woman named Ava Hayes, articulated the case clearly and succinctly, summarizing Mr. Smith's actions, from his attack on Sarah to his racial slurs and the destruction of her property. With a confident tone, Ava asserted that Mr. Smith's actions were neither random nor misunderstandings, but a deliberate series of hostile acts. "Your Honor, my client, Miss Sarah, was simply parked in an empty space," Ava stated. That simple action triggered a barrage of insults, threats, and violence from the defendant. This case is not merely about a parking spot. It serves as a stark illustration of racial discrimination and the abuse of power by an individual attempting to demean and intimidate someone solely based on the color of their skin. Across the room, Mr. Smith maintained a stoic expression, though resentment flickered in his eyes. When it was time for the defense to present, Mr. Smith's attorney sought to portray a different narrative, framing Mr. Smith as a stressed husband and father having a bad day, suggesting that the incident was merely an impulsive reaction. The defense attorney even implored the jury for compassion, urging them to consider Mr. Smith's circumstances. Sarah felt her heart tighten as she listened to the opposing attorney's portrayal of Mr. Smith as a sympathetic figure. However, her knowledge of his hostile and arrogant demeanor fortified her resolve. She understood that she needed to stand up not just for herself, but to demonstrate that abuse and discrimination would not be tolerated. As the trial progressed, evidence was presented, including the surveillance footage from the parking lot, which played in court. The video captured Mr. Smith approaching Sarah and slapping her without provocation, followed by his vandalism of her car. The footage rendered the courtroom silent, with even some jurors visibly unsettled by Mr. Smith's aggressive conduct and unreasonable behavior. When it was Sarah's turn to testify, she stood up with composure and courage, recounting the entire incident, from parking her car to the insults, the attack, and the destruction of her vehicle. Her voice quivered slightly but remained steady as she emphasized that she had only retaliated after being attacked. She clarified that Mr. Smith's actions were not random acts of anger, but rather blatant displays of contempt and deep-seated racism. Mr. Smith's attorney attempted to assert that his client had merely reacted out of frustration, alleging that Sarah had provoked him. However, with poise and heartfelt clarity, Sarah articulated that she had no desire to escalate tensions and was simply defending herself. At the close of the first day of the trial, she returned home weary yet infused with hope. She felt reassured that she had spoken the truth and refused to be silenced. Although this was only the beginning of her battle, a sense of relief washed over her as she realized she had stood her ground. She hoped that by sharing her experience, individuals like Mr. Smith would come to recognize that hate and discrimination would no longer be tolerated and that everyone deserved the right to uphold their dignity. Sarah understood that the days ahead would be fraught with challenges, yet she was prepared to await justice. After several days of intense hearings, the court finally reached the closing arguments. With her characteristic sharpness and calm, Sarah's attorney, Ava Hayes, stepped forward but spoke with a heightened intensity, revealing her unwavering determination. She meticulously laid out the facts, highlighting Mr. Smith's violent actions and prejudiced attitudes, underscoring that this was not merely a petty dispute, but a case of blatant abuse and disrespect toward another human being. We are dealing with an incident that is utterly unacceptable, driven by malice and arrogance, Ava stated, addressing the jury. Mr. Smith not only assaulted my client physically, but he also attacked her dignity and her right to live equally. Such behavior cannot be tolerated in a just society. In response, the defense attorney continued to plead for the jury's sympathy, depicting Mr. Smith as a stressed individual reacting impulsively to circumstances, even suggesting that Sarah's defensive slap should also be considered aggressive. Listening to these claims ignited a blend of anger and frustration in Sarah. Despite her clear explanation that her actions were solely defensive, Mr. Smith continued to manipulate the narrative, positioning himself as the victim. When the jury finally retired to deliberate, Sarah sat quietly in the courtroom, her emotions swirling. She reflected on her journey, from the pain of the attack to the relentless pursuit of being heard. Now, all she could do was hope for a just outcome. After what felt like an eternity, the jury returned to the courtroom, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. When the jury pronounced Mr. Smith guilty of assault and property damage, Sarah struggled to process the news. Relief and a sense of liberation surged within her. Justice had been served, and she felt a sense of protection for the first time in a long while. In stark contrast, Mr. Smith sat in disbelief, his expression darkening as the realization set in. His actions would finally bear consequences. As the trial concluded, Sarah rose, feeling as if an immense weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Although she had anticipated feeling elated or fulfilled, she instead experienced a complex mix of emptiness and sorrow. She recognized that while she had achieved a legal victory, the wounds inflicted by Mr. Smith would take much longer to heal. The prejudice and hatred he exhibited could not simply vanish with a single verdict. Exiting the courthouse, Sarah paused on the steps, soaking in the sunlight and gentle breeze. She understood that while she had done all she could, the struggle was far from finished. Racism, unfounded prejudice, and people like Mr. Smith would continue to exist, perpetuating hate against others. She knew that the fight for justice and compassion would always require brave souls willing to stand up, not just for themselves but for others as well. A woman approached her, grasping her hand with eyes filled with empathy and admiration. "You were incredibly brave, Sarah. You did something that many would hesitate to attempt," she said earnestly. Sarah smiled, knowing that she had played a part, however small, in this ongoing struggle. Even if she could not change the entire world, she was making a difference. Reflecting on the journey ahead, Sarah realized that although the legal battle had come to a close, there was still much work to be done. Justice had been served, but the quest for a more equitable society was just beginning. As she made her way to her car, her thoughts drifted to the painful memories of that day, the physical agony and emotional turmoil still vivid in her mind. Although her car had been repaired, the scars on her pride were deep and would take time to heal. In the weeks following the verdict, Sarah tried to return to her daily life, but thoughts of the trial and her confrontation with Mr. Smith lingered persistently. She recalled the insults, the contemptuous glares, and his arrogant demeanor, all stark reminders of the grim realities faced by many simply because of their skin color. She remembered the astonishment on his face when the verdict was delivered, realizing that to him, his actions were justified, something he believed he could carry out without repercussions. One evening, while sitting on her balcony and gazing at the distant city lights, Sarah contemplated the meaning of justice. She recognized that while Mr. Smith's sentencing was a step in the right direction, it would not erase the deep-seated prejudice that he and others held. His hateful actions were not just a reflection of his character, but were symptomatic of a larger societal issue, one that she felt compelled to confront. Sarah thought of those who had inspired her throughout history, individuals who bravely stood up for justice and strived to foster a fairer society. She realized that she too had a responsibility to continue this legacy, not just for her own sake, but for those who lacked a voice. She felt a renewed commitment to be an advocate for change, aiming to cultivate a community where everyone is treated with respect, regardless of their race or background. As each day passed, this resolve solidified. Sarah became actively involved in nonprofit organizations championing human rights and racial equality. She shared her narrative to raise awareness, cultivate empathy, and inspire others to advocate for themselves. The public speaking events and workshops she attended ignited within her a sense of purpose, as she recognized the small yet meaningful contributions she was making toward change. One morning, after completing a workshop, Sarah noticed a young woman approaching her. "Thank you for sharing your story so bravely," the woman said, taking her hand. "It made me realize I'm not alone." These words resonated deeply with Sarah, reaffirming that her efforts were making a difference and motivating her to persist on her journey. As she got into her car and caught a glimpse of her reflection in the rearview mirror, Sarah smiled. The person staring back was no longer someone who felt weak or powerless in the face of discrimination and hatred. She was a strong individual who had fought to reclaim her dignity for herself and others. Though the scars remained, they now fueled her determination to continue the fight for a just world. Sarah started her car, merging into the bustling traffic, fully aware that many challenges lay ahead. But now, she felt prepared to face them with unwavering determination and faith in her self-worth. Thus unfolds the story of Sarah, a narrative marked by struggles, but also by the courage and resolve to advocate for justice and self-respect. Sarah's journey serves as a powerful reminder that even in the face of hatred, prejudice, or injustice, we all possess the right and strength to stand up for ourselves. No one should be demeaned simply for being different, and sometimes The bravery of one individual can inspire countless others to find their voices. Through Sarah's story, we hope you find the encouragement to persevere and remain steadfast in any situation, understanding that justice, while sometimes delayed, will ultimately prevail if we remain patient and resolute. Together, let's strive to create a world that is fair and compassionate, where everyone is treated with respect. If you found this story meaningful and wish to continue receiving similar content, please subscribe to our channel and remember to ring the bell to stay updated on our future videos. Thank you for watching and supporting us.